evening and welcome to the Tuesday, February 18, 2020 Select Board meeting. We know the meeting has been properly warned because we came at 5:30 for executive session. At this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the January 21st, January 28th, and February 4th meetings of the Select Board.
So moved.
Elizabeth has made that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
The next section is Chair's Remarks, and I do have Chair's Remarks that were left right here on my binder while I was gone. And those remarks are that tomorrow night, which is Wednesday, February 19th at 6:30 p.m. in this very room, the Select Board room, second floor, Municipal Center, will be the Select Board Candidates Forum. It will be aired live on Channel 10 and live streamed on Facebook at the Brattleboro Community TV Facebook page. If you need to come to the meeting and you want accessible entrance, please make sure to come and park in the back parking lot where you can use the elevator to come up to this floor. Okay, those are my comments. Peter?
Thank you. I have two this evening. One is an immediate follow-up to that, just to remind everyone that early voting has begun for both the presidential primary and the town's election. Early voting is occurring on the first floor of the Municipal Center every weekday during business hours between 8:30 and 5. Also, the town clerk's office, also on the first floor here at the Municipal Center, will be open on Saturday, March 29th. That's the last Saturday before the day of the election. Saturday, March 29th from 9 in the morning until noon here at the town clerk's office for folks who want to vote early. And then the actual election day is March 3rd, Tuesday, March 3rd. The polls will be open from 7 in the morning until 7 in the evening next door to the Municipal Center at the American Legion Hall. There will be parking available that day at the Legion, at the State Office Building parking lot, at the courthouse, and in our Municipal Center parking lot. We are anticipating a better than average turnout, given that it's not just the town's local election, but also a presidential primary election. And so we'll be trying to make sure that it is convenient for everyone to come and participate in the vote. And a quick update about the Hinsdale Bridge project. Here in this room last week, we had a meeting of the Hinsdale and Brattleboro Combined Citizen Advisory Committee, working with New Hampshire DOT and Vermont's Agency of Transportation, VTrans, in the development of that project. And so I have a timeline, an updated timeline to share with everyone. It's actually, they are anticipating that the NHDOT, who is responsible for the construction of the project, anticipates that the project should still be done by the original deadline. It's going to start a little bit later than intended in terms of getting out to bid and having an award of a contract, but it's multiple years and they believe that they can make up the time. So the time frame, so the community's aware of how soon it's coming along, is that the project should be out to bid this summer in August. With a bid award in the fall and active construction work beginning a little over a year from now in April of 2021. The active construction is to continue from 2021 until 2023. And when the new bridge is completed, there will then be rehabilitation work done on the two old bridges, or existing bridges, to turn them into bike ped access between the two states. So that project is expected to take about another year and be done in 2024.
Thank you, Peter. Plenty of time to plan our alternate routes if you use a car.
Indeed.
From 2021 to 2024.
Yeah, well, and one nice factor in this project is the old bridges will remain in use until the new bridge is ready to take that traffic. So while there will be a lot of activity in the area, the disruption should be less than for some other bridge projects.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I will move to Select Board comments and committee reports. Is there anybody who would like to make a comment or give a committee report? Daniel?
I was just going to jump on the candidate forum thing, and I'm glad that you brought it up and not me. And in addition to being on BCTV or live in this room, it's also going to be on the radio live, hopefully, fingers crossed, if we get the technology right, on WVEW 107.7 FM.
Excellent. Community media at its finest. Very good. Other members of the board have comments or committee reports? Tim?
I just want to let everybody know that last week, Liz and Peter and I were
fortunate enough to be able to spend the time to go to VLCT's Town Governance Day up in Montpelier. I think that's what they call it,
Local government.
Local Government Day, sorry. Which is always an experience. I think it was the third time I went up. And we basically, we spoke about a lot of subjects with our legislators. I think we would summarize it as 3 different subjects that we concentrated the most on. That was the upcoming decisions they're going to be making with cannabis and cannabis taxation and regulation. The self-governance, which, as you know, if you've been paying attention, that this board has been very involved with, and so has our town manager, serving on the VLCT board himself. And also some wastewater regulation details that we have a high stake in, and our citizens do. So I thought I would speak a little bit to the cannabis, what happened there, and maybe Liz can take self-governance, and I'm going to spring a surprise on Peter and say, you can let us know what's going on in wastewater, just a little snippet. But as far as the cannabis taxation goes, the House Government Ops Committee had sent it out with a recommended 2% local option tax recommendation, which was less than we were looking for, but still a reasonable place to land. Then something went sideways, we think. The House Ways and Means, while negotiating for a 14% excise tax, so a 14% tax on all cannabis sales, and 6% regular sales tax sales on the cannabis, the only thing a town would get in that scenario is a 1% local option tax, which only if you're a town that passed the 1% local option tax like we did last year, luckily. So that would be a small amount. But what they're moving, they seem to be moving to the idea of, instead of giving all the towns and all the municipalities the ability to take a portion of the taxation, to instead have us participate similar to the way they give us fees for liquor commissioners. We charge in parity the fees that the state can, for the most part, which is a much less amount. It's very little money going to the towns, and very little money proportionally going to towns like ours that are actually paying for police forces and fire department, and are going to be heavily impacted, or we don't really know what the impact's going to be. So we're trying to stake out a little bit of money for the community, because we're going to be left with all this responsibility when this gets passed. Anyway, there was a lot going back and forth, and but we had some good conversations. We're not sure where it stands right now. It's having trouble at the moment just going anywhere, I think. And I'll just let Liz talk about self-governance, I think.
Well, it was very interesting going to this conference, and I got to see relationships between the town and the legislators that I hadn't seen and understood before. I was pleasantly surprised that I didn't know a lot of legislators, and was able to get some insights from them about how they view our priorities. And one of them was self-governance. And it's interesting because it's such a big deal to us and the towns that also want it. And it was definitely small potatoes to the legislature. The Senate has passed its Bill S-106, but it hasn't been taken out by the House. And I think, I was able to tell the House leadership how important it is to us and get that back on their radar. They seemed surprised that it's something that we would want when it's so obvious to us that it's necessary. So if anyone is inclined to contact their legislators and tell them how important it is to Brattleboro, they should do so. I think we should just mention what a great job Senator Jeanette White did for us in getting this passed by the Senate last year. And that's it. Just local decision making is so important to us. and a lot of the other towns chimed in because it's important to a lot of different towns on things like getting a stop sign or other tiny matters that have to go up to the state to be decided when, as we said, it would free the legislator up to doing their important business without worrying about these picayune little things that they worry about on our behalf. So it's something that if our constituents, if our town residents told the legislature that it was important to them as mutual constituents, it might be helpful, because I don't think that it's registering to them that the towns themselves have can take this responsibility on themselves. Anything else?
Thanks, Liz. Peter, did you want to chime in about wastewater?
Yeah, just briefly. So it's the stormwater management that legislation that the state has passed is necessary in order to protect the waters of the state, but particularly Lake Champlain. So there's a phosphorus problem up in the northwest part of the state that is requiring a very significant expense of investing in better stormwater management infrastructure, both by municipalities and by private interests. On this side of the state, there's a nitrogen issue with the river that is not as significant, but still exists. It needs to be addressed. The problem with the legislation is, as so often is true in our relationship with the state, it goes right to the heart of the self-governance discussion, that the requirements have been passed without sufficient funding assistance. These are major investments that municipalities are having to make in stormwater management infrastructure, mostly but not exclusively along roadsides. For some communities, it's also including a very significant investment in upgrading their sewage treatment plants, but because our wastewater treatment plant was upgraded just within this decade, that part fortunately isn't going to be a burden for Brattleboro. But the upshot of it is, tying back to our recent budget discussions and looking ahead to things we will be working on in the year ahead, that here in Brattleboro, we think that the best approach for us to make sure that there is both a effective funding mechanism and a fair way to collect the money from the people who are actually contributing stormwater runoff is a stormwater utility, which would be function like the water and sewer utility, but specific to stormwater functioning. And the main reason why that's important is there is an equity issue that will address among those of us who live in own property in Brattleboro, and whether that's residential property or commercial industrial property. But the most important reason why that will be important to us in our community is because of the amount of state property that contributes to this. So I-91 is a huge contributor of stormwater runoff. There are other state highways all over town that contribute, and some state facilities like the building next door. So the state of Vermont doesn't pay any property taxes, but is a contributor to the fee-based payments into a stormwater utility, and we'll have more information to share on that in the months ahead.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other committee reports or comments from this table? Okay, then I am going to go ahead and move us into public participation. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak on something that is not listed on tonight's agenda. Is there anybody here tonight who's here to do that? Okay. Then I'm going to move on to liquor commissioners. I would entertain a motion to convene as liquor commissioners. Okay, David's made that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
We are now liquor commissioners, and our first order of business is second-class liquor license renewal for Max LLC, doing business as One Stop. Okay, hi there. If you'd like to come over to our table, you can introduce yourself. The microphone will not amplify your voice, but it allows people watching on TV to hear you.
Okay. My name is John Cushman, one of the owners of Max LLC. Mohammed Anand with me today is the other owner. Here to address the instance where one of our employees did sell alcohol, beer, to an underage person. He was when we checked them on it, because we had trained them beforehand when we took the place over in October, that this is urgent. We got to do this. And he said he was very busy one night, and he thought he knew this person, and he called us right away after and said, "Oh my God, I don't know what happened." And we trained him, and we told him again that this is very, very important. You can never let this happen again. And I'm happy to say since then, we've got 2 positive commendations from the Liquor Control Board that they've checked, and we're on track.
Great.
Great.
Members of the board have questions or comments outside of the information that was just provided?
Yeah,
David?
just, you mentioned it would never happen again, but this was your second?
We had this was, when we first took it over, we had a couple of people in there, and they left on us, and then these other 2 people came in, and they're the ones that are there now, and this happened to them. And we thought we had them trained well, and we explained it going in, and like I said, what happened that one night happened, and since we've urged them and really stressed how eminent this is, since then, haven't done it.
So the first
last
violation
2
was the previous employees?
previous employees, correct.
Thanks for that clarifying question, David. Other members of the board have questions or comments?
Yeah.
I don't.
I don't either. I think you know whatever it is. Sounds like you've already addressed
Oh,
it expediently.
This is urgent. No.
So, okay. Okay, perfect. So if we don't have further questions or comments, then at this time, I would entertain a motion for this renewal. Liz?
I move to approve the renewal of a second-class liquor license for Max LLC, doing business as One Stop at 414 Canal Street.
Excellent. Liz has made that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for coming in.
Okay, we are still liquor commissioners, and our second order of business is the renewal of a first and third class liquor license and entertainment permit for $3 Dewey's, doing business as McNeil's. And Ray, if you'd come over to our table.
Do you have to recuse yourself because you get your picture taken in there all the time?
No, that's good.
Hold on now. Okay, once again, the microphone won't amplify you, but
I
it's
heard
for it
that.
to be perfect. Okay.
Well, I'm somewhat at a loss of words here. The server, one of the servers failed a compliance test,
Okay.
and she has worked for me for 8 years. This was not, she's not new by any means. In fact, she works more than any other employee, any of the servers, that is. And she made a mistake. I don't know what else to say. She was preoccupied cleaning the place and not paying attention. She and I were both required by the state to take the server training course again. I've taken it
Yeah.
probably 20 times.
Yeah.
And I would just like to point out that this is the first time that anything like this has happened in 35 years.
Wow. Yeah.
You're
Yeah,
not
that's
likely
quite
to
the
be
record.
back here again, then.
Huh? Well, if it happens again in 35 years,
I'm not going to be here.
I won't be here, and a lot of us will not be here.
I'm planning on it.
You're planning on, okay, that's you.
I won't.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Are there members of the, excuse me, members of the board that have questions or comments for Mr. McNeil?
No.
That was a pretty cut and dry explanation. Tim, David?
Nope, we're all set.
Yeah, a letter of warning from the state, I guess, is what you've got. Can I ask you a question? Because
Yep,
I've never known
sure.
the answer to this. Why is it known as $3 Dewey's?
That's the corporate name.
Oh, yeah.
We started doing business as McNeil's Brewery, and then our legal name now is McNeil's Pub and Brewery. But that switch happened around 1992, maybe 93, somewhere in there. 92. So,
Just curious where the name came from.
right. Right. That was the original corporate name.
Got it. All right, well, thanks for being one of our many Brattleboro institutions.
And you guys are pretty busy down there, so the fact that this is the first time in 35 years, I'm sorry that it happened, but I think there's something to be said for that as well, for the track record. So good job. I would at this time entertain a motion for this renewal.
I move,
Go ahead.
go ahead, okay. I move we approve renewal of a first-class liquor license, a third-class liquor license, and an entertainment permit for $3 Dewey's, doing business as McNeil's Brewery at 90 Elliott Street.
Perfect. David has made that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Sorry, I was distracted signing the liquor license.
All right. Please do sign the
Try to
liquor
keep-
license.
try to
That's
keep
important. All right. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Ray, for coming in. Appreciate it. Okay. We have one final item, and that is a new second-class liquor license for Passmart Inc.
Passmart, we learned this afternoon the representative of Passmart might not make it because of the weather this
Oh,
evening.
okay.
So
Sure.
I can speak to the status of this matter, and then you can decide whether you wish to proceed or whether you'd rather hold it over for an evening when the representative can be here.
Okay.
This is the same type of liquor license previously held by those who ran it as Sunny's Sunoco for many years in the same location. It has been reviewed by the police department, fire department, and other town staff. We do believe that everything is in order and ready for your approval. It's unusual, but not improper for the select board to approve a license like this when it's been thoroughly vetted, but when the representative of the business is not present. So
And
it's really a discretionary call for you.
Is this just beer and wine like it's always been?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Second class is the sale of beer and wine to
And tobacco.
take off the premises, not to
Okay.
be consumed on the premises.
Yeah, just it's always been as long as I've known it anyways.
Did this entity have a problem in the past year?
No, not at all. The other two that were before you tonight to address violations that had occurred were because they were part of the batch of renewals 2 weeks ago tonight. And you asked that they come in and talk about what had happened with the violations. This is completely separate from that. It's a new issuance. If you approve it, it'll be the new issuance of a license to the people who are going to be the new operators of that facility that's been there for many years.
But I understand correctly that it's a new issuance, but it's not a new location for
Correct.
selling.
That's correct.
Definitely
Yeah.
line
We're not
there.
adding another outlet.
Right.
Basically, Vermont doesn't allow transfers of liquor licenses. In other jurisdictions, often something like this would be a transfer from the old owner to a new owner. Here, what happens is the old owner permission evaporates because they're no longer operating the facility, and the new owner needs to obtain a new license.
And go through the training and.
Go through the whole process. Exactly.
I think, given that we may not be meeting at our regular time, I would be willing to make an exception and approve this. And since the police and fire have already said everything is in order.
I don't really have a problem approving it either, just because it's not an additional point of sale. That would raise more concern for me than continuing the same establishment or the same location, point of sale.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to trust that everyone did their work and their due diligence, and by the time it gets here, if it's recommended for approval, then it's good enough for me.
Okay. Then I would entertain a motion on this item.
I'll make a motion.
All right.
Move to approve a second-class liquor license for Passmart Inc. at 228 Canal Street.
All right. Daniel has made that motion. All those in favor? Aye. Motion carries 5-0. I would entertain a motion to adjourn as liquor commissioners.
So moved.
Liz has made that motion. All those in favor? Aye. And so we now move to unfinished business, and our one and only item is Communications Union District, CUD, planning process. And our first item under that item is an update from Sue Westa from the Wyndham Regional Commission.
If it's okay with the select board, Patrick has a couple of
Absolutely.
table setting remarks.
Please do, Patrick.
Thank you. So, as you know, we have a special guest this evening, and before I pass the microphone over to Sue Westa from the Wyndham Regional Planning Commission, I thought it might be worthwhile to remind particularly the folks at home about the nature of the conversation which has been ongoing in Brattleboro for about the last 2 years. For those who are frequent watchers of select board meetings, you might remember that in late 2018, a member of the library staff actually approached the select board during public participation to say, hey, you know, there are communities out there that are developing and building out municipally owned fiber optic internet services, and maybe that's something Brattleboro could take a look at. The board at the time thought it was worth exploring, and so they sent staff on a mission to investigate. I later came back to the board in September of last year with a fairly lengthy report that tried to outline the existing level of service in Brattleboro today and sort of comparing that to other areas of Vermont. It detailed a number of municipally managed fiber optic internet service projects from several towns within a couple hours drive of Brattleboro, some that were down in Massachusetts, others in Vermont. And lastly, that report attempted to explore the current state of state statute as it relates to public financing for municipal internet service or communications plan. And I'm sure the board will recall that what we discovered there is that in terms of public financing, the only allowable methodology in the state of Vermont is for revenue bonds and not for general obligation bonds. There was a lot to chew on there at that meeting, and so the board took this matter up again in October of that same year, last year. And at that point in time, staff was asking for some direction. What would you like for us to pursue? And at the time, the board concluded that we should move forward on two fronts. The first would be to let the state know of our desire to at least have the authority to use general obligation bonds, should we choose so. And to that effect, we worked with an existing small committee of state folks who were asked by the legislature to explore that idea. So that included the head of the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank, the state treasurer, Beth Pierce, and also the secretary of the administration. We provided our input to them in a letter. Our views eventually made it into their report to the legislature, but unfortunately their recommendation to the legislature was that we not permit general obligation bonding at this time. So that's sort of where that sits at the moment. The second direction that the board gave to staff was to continue to participate with regional discussions around a communication union district. In the months since that time, the Wyndham Regional Commission sought out and received funding from the Vermont Department of Public Service. They got what's called a BIG grant, or a Broadband Innovation Grant, the amount of $60,000. And the purpose of that funding was to provide professional technical assistance to participating Wyndham Region municipalities in the exploration of a communications union district. That project got underway formally just last month in January, and that project has been specifically assigned to Sue Westa, a senior planner at the Wyndham Regional Commission. And Sue's here, and she can walk us through a little bit about what that project entails.
Thank you, Patrick. Sue.
Okay, so yeah, I think I'll start by giving you an overview, kind of high-level overview of our project, and then if you have questions, we can go from there. So as Patrick said, we got this grant from the State Public Service Commission, and we are kicked off the meeting. We signed the grant in December, signed the contract, and then held our kickoff meeting in January, where we had over 60 attendees. at the Newfane Fire Department where we had the meeting. There seems to be lots of interest. I'm getting calls all the time from communities and folks who are interested in this project. And this effort is really about developing a feasibility study and a business plan, looking at whether or not we should form a community, or our community should form a communications union district, or maybe multiple communication union district in order to implement fiber broadband throughout our region. This is really focused on, the communication union districts are really focused first on serving those communities that are unserved and or underserved. However, all communities throughout the region are able to participate. It's following a model that was developed by ValleyNet and EC Fiber just north of here. That model has been successful, and they have implemented broadband service through most of the towns in that region right now. They're still working on a few of those in that region. However, Carol Monroe from EC Fiber is one of our partners on this project. She is one of our technical service providers. Our other technical service provider is from the Rural Innovation Strategies Group, who has experience with this. They've been working with ValleyNet and looking at implementing broadband service in other rural regions throughout the country, actually. So the Wyndham Region Commission is really a part of this grant to help bring all the communities together and get the word out about the project and hear about, what the community's concerns are. So after we held our kickoff meeting in January, we asked all the towns to develop a resolution saying that they were interested in participating and assign a town appointee so that we know have a specific person that we knew to reach out to. And then last week, we held a survey training meeting. So one of the things that we're doing in order to hear from the folks in the region is a survey that just went up online today. It's on our website at wyndhamregional.org/broadband. There's lots of other resources for communities who are looking to get the word out about the survey. So not only is the survey available online, but there's a paper copy for those folks who don't have access to the online version. There are flyers, there are summary sheets that people can use to help develop articles, but that's really what the meeting was about last week, and a lot of folks had some really interesting ideas for how to get the survey out in their towns, from having a table at their town meeting to standing outside their local grocery store or the town dump. They're going to be putting paper flyers out at local libraries and town halls, and I know Patrick has already got a lot of that underway here in Brattleboro. So that survey is due March 17th. We'll be taking responses until that time. At that point, our technical service providers will finalize their feasibility study. That should be done by the end of April. Then the state will take a look at that and approve it. They have promised that they would do that within a couple weeks, and once that is approved, the business plan will be developed, and that is targeted to be completed this summer, July or August. Taking a step back a second, in terms of communication union districts, we're only 2 towns are required to have a town meeting vote in order to form a communication union district. And then if other communities are interested in participating, they just need a vote of their Board of Selectmen to participate in the communications union district. So we have a couple, at least I think 3 or 4, who are bringing it to town meeting this March, and I'm sure others will join on. Others have certainly expressed interest, but depending on the results of the feasibility study and the business plan. And then that information would be handed over to the Communications Union District, however that forms. And then they'll begin the work of trying to figure out how to finance the development. And there are grants through the federal and state governments. They can use revenue bonds. And but it's not connected to the municipality at all. There's no way that the municipalities will be responsible for any of these the finances related to the Communications Union District. That is all through the Communications Union District and its board and the folks who, of course, are participating in the service. So, do you have any questions specifically?
Great. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is that was so much good information. I just want to pull us right back to saying, if you want to be able to participate in the survey, which needs to be done by Tuesday, March 17th, one way to do it is to go through the project website at www.wyndhamregional.org/broadband. And Patrick, where in Brattleboro can people get paper copies?
Sure. Paper copies are available in the town manager's office, at the town clerk's office. By this time tomorrow, it'll be available at Brooks Memorial Library and also at the Gibson Aiken Center. I would point out that there is a link to the survey already on the town's website, right on the front page. And later this week, we are doing a mailing to every residence in Brattleboro, indicating, here's the web address. Please take a few minutes and provide us with your feedback. If you're unable to, get online, we understand. Please reach out to the town manager's office and we'll make arrangements to get a paper copy in your hands.
That sounds great. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Now, are there questions or comments from members of the board for Sue or Patrick, but Sue? David?
I have a couple, but I was
Okay.
assuming you might want to jump. Okay. Thank you again. First of all, so much for taking time to come here and let us know what's going on. You mentioned it's the underserved communities, and when we had our discussion that Patrick referred to some time ago, a few months ago, we learned that, well, first of all, it depends on your definition, but of broadband, which is, we have a minimal definition, and then there's what we'd like to see as far as internet speeds. But how would you define underserved communities? We found out that we are approximately 95% covered in a minimal definition of broadband speeds. So how would you compare Brattleboro's situation to some of the other communities? What kind of percentage coverage, if you know?
Yes, I don't know specifically off the top of my head, but I do know that there are communities that have very minimal internet access at all. And there are ones that all they have is DSL, which is very low service. So, I understand that not everybody in Brattleboro is served, and you might want to be served at a higher rate eventually, and that would be one reason to participate in this effort and to eventually become part of the district.
Okay.
It's much more effective for these small rural places to band together in order to provide a service like this. It really doesn't make sense for each town to do it on their own. The costs are just too high, and there's just not enough benefit for any of the companies. So that's why connecting the rural communities with those that are more densely developed does help too.
That does make sense to you, that we would jump in the fray.
Yes,
even
absolutely.
with communities that have literally sometimes no
So
access.
you wouldn't be the first ones to receive, to have
Sure.
build out fiber. They would go to those underserved and unserved ones first, but you would be part of the organization or part of the district, and then eventually you would be, and that's what's happening with the EC Fiber Group right now.
And thank you. My second question is simple too. The Wyndham Region Broadband Project, it occurs to me that can be a little bit of a broader definition than just fiber. Do you happen to know if these monies can be used for other technologies such as wireless, cellular communications?
This grant is specifically focused on broadband fiber.
Okay, so
Yes.
physical line fiber
Yes,
infrastructure build-outs.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
I sort of want to follow on from that.
Yeah.
You know, if this project were to move forward, there's a big build out of physical infrastructure. And also we're at a time where technology is leaping forward. Is there a danger that the physical infrastructure that gets built becomes out of date pretty quickly?
Our technical service advisors are suggesting that this, in more rural areas at least, this is going to be the next step for quite a while. I don't know
But in Brattleboro,
specifically
maybe.
how much, but in larger urban areas like, Boston and New York, not even Brattleboro, they're going to have a lot of other options there. It's still going to be fairly limited up here, and the amount of download and upload speeds that you can get with the fiber is pretty significant, and much more significant than what many folks have now.
I just got another one, if I may.
Yeah.
I do ask a lot of questions.
You saw that.
I know. So when we were talking about this originally, as Patrick mentioned, there was this question about general obligation bonds. They'd been used in Massachusetts effectively to fund projects that were locally owned. That's not an option for us here in Vermont. And you reminded me that the Communications Union District would be the ones seeking the revenue bond. That's correct?
Yes.
And so a town participating, the taxpayers of a town participating in the Communications Union District are sort of insulated from
Yes,
losses?
they are, and that's very clear in the statute.
Can you say more about that? Explain it for me like I'm 5.
So the Communication
Thank you.
Union District functions similarly to a town. Instead of having a board of selectmen, they would have a board of the Communications Union District. And those folks will make the decisions about, and there would be a representative from each of the towns at least who participates. And those folks would make all the financial decisions, would apply for grants and loans, and it would operate similarly to how a town does, only it's a completely different organization.
So if the CUD loses money, what happens to the taxpayers of the town that is part of that CUD?
Nothing should happen to them.
Okay.
Well, Patrick wants to jump.
Yeah, if I can, I'd just like to jump on that and emphasize that a little bit more. It's explicitly clear in the statutes that provide for communication union districts that property tax dollars or sales tax dollars are utterly unwelcome within the framework of a communication union district, and that the only recourse for investors would be the assets of the CUD. But just to be really clear and upfront, before staff comes back with a recommendation for your consideration that, hey, we ought to participate in a communications union district, one of the things that we'll be doing is having Bob Fisher take a really close look at this and providing his advice to you as to what any of the risks that Brattleboro would be accepting by participating. But our expectation at this time is that there is essentially a firewall between the CUD and the municipality, and that the municipality's assets could not be tapped in the event that the CUD went belly up.
Liz?
I have my same broken record question about regional towns working together, because I know for our relationship with the Wyndham Regional Commission is a per capita fee, and therefore we pay more than the surrounding towns because our population is larger. Is the representation in this in whatever union district that's created for funding of the broadband, going to be similarly based on a per capita amount? Or is it because the smaller towns are the ones that have the greater need than we do?
No, I do not believe so. It will be, the towns will not participate at that level financially. It will be individual subscribers that will participate.
Thank you.
Talk a little bit, I think it's hard to understand the financing because we have one, we only have a couple of models that we understand municipalities typically use. And can you talk a little bit about how BC Fiber raised money for their project? Are you familiar with that?
So generally, I'm familiar. If you want really specifics, we'd have to have our partner, Carol Monroe, here. But generally, I understand that they financed a lot of it up front with individual investments from the community. There are folks who stepped up with large contributions. They're not recommending that we do it that way. And they learned some lessons through that process that, they're sharing with us and other new CUDs that are getting up and running. But they, once they had some of that funding in place, then they were able to get some loans, I believe, to help state economic development loans to get that construction up and running. And now they have a lot of customers, so they're financed more that way.
Yeah. I believe they also sold much smaller, or got much smaller investments from people along the road, so that when they had enough people investing, they could run it up.
That may be true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be worth hearing more about that model. It was pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. Also, the way you described the underserved areas, and I think that one of somebody at the New Fane meeting talked about. For Brattleboro, the most likely effect would be if Dummerston were a member and it wound up going up Stickney Brook, then it would be very easy for it to come down the other side, down Sunset Lake or down Pleasant Valley and into that part of town, coming from a rural rather than coming from the urban center.
Right.
That's a more likely outcome.
Sure.
But there are a couple of things that I think have turned out to be misconceptions, at least based on what I heard at the New Fane meeting, and one of them was about the general obligation bonding. I understand, and I thought was said quite clearly at that meeting, that a municipality could take general obligation bonds to run fiber to municipal facilities. If we wanted to run fiber to the police department or out to the public works area, we could bond for that and we could run that, and then people could take service off that backbone along that route. And that was pretty clearly articulated by the woman from EC Fiber.
I thought it was just the revenue
Patrick,
bonds
do you recall
as well.
that?
I do. It was a position of Carol Monroe that if the municipality was building its own network for its own purposes for internal communication, so for example, if we wanted to build our own network where the municipal center could communicate with the Gibson Aiken Center, the library, and public works, etc., we could use general obligations for the purposes of constructing our own publicly managed network for our own purposes. I think some additional research, particularly from Bob Fisher, would be worthwhile before we assumed that could necessarily provide service to the public, because I think we're then in that situation where we'd be using general obligation bonds to provide a retail service, and I think we
do that with our roads, by the way, but yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, and by the way, I completely agree. I mean, our argument for the use of general obligation bonds and for our ability to move forward that way, if in fact, that's what the people of Brattleboro would like, I think it's pretty clear. But
another question that came up was around I think, no, actually it was Chris Campany that responded to this one, about the confining, a lot of towns have decided they want to confine development. They want to keep development down in a compact area and not have it happening, sort of spasmodic or scattered around the region. And I don't recall exactly what his response was. I sort of asked if he could come tonight because I didn't recall that. But do you recall, or what the why it's also important for the downtown or the more compressed, compact, whatever the right word is for more urban areas, and why it's also important for fiber to come into those areas?
In order for fiber to, so like for Brattleboro, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I think the value is in getting that higher quality connection. If folks in town here aren't feeling like their connections are good enough for what they need to do in terms of, businesses, school, it's an important education tool
Streaming,
now,
Netflix.
healthcare, there are a lot of things.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that you included all that in the summary sheet. The students and teachers part, particularly the opportunity to interact in real time with large numbers of students. If, for instance, a snow day occurred or if somebody was homesick, they could
Right.
still be in class. And the same is true with that kind of resolution for medical diagnosis and treatments and teaching, turning a school nurse office into a medical home for families whose kids are in those buildings. So there's a lot of really significant value in it. So I appreciate you including that in the presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. And I appreciate the update tonight. We do still have another item under this update, which does require action, to not lose sight of that, and that is the official designation of the town representative to the CUD. Is that correct? And who would like to address that item? Sue, Peter? Feels
Sure.
weird for Patrick to address it.
So, happy to relieve Patrick of that weirdness.
Great.
So, based on your earlier discussions, Patrick outlined well at the beginning of this item the history of how this has been considered by this board and actually prior select boards here in Brattleboro as well. And based on the action that this board took last fall, directing that we stay engaged with whatever regional effort might evolve, Patrick has been doing that on behalf of the town. And so since the organizers of this effort now are requesting that there be a specifically designated individual, we think it makes sense for the board to designate Patrick as that specifically designated contact person for Brattleboro.
Yeah, he doesn't have enough to do.
Nope. Nope, he needs one more thing. Okay, then I would entertain a motion for that appointment, designee appointment.
I move to designate Assistant Town Manager Patrick Moreland as the town's representative in the regional planning effort for a communication union district.
Okay, Liz has made that motion. All those in favor? Aye. Oh, before we voted, I guess I should have asked if you accept.
Well, this
Too
is
late.
weird. Yes, I'd be happy to.
Great, thank goodness. Then we are all unanimous. Wonderful, thank you so much, Sue.
Thank you.
Drive safe tonight. Okay, that concludes our unfinished business for the evening, and we will now go ahead and move into new business. And our first item under new business is the financial report, the monthly report for January. Peter?
Thank you. So the basic report that I have to offer tonight is not particularly noteworthy. It's about like you usually see for this time of the year. There is some really good news I want to share at the end. But the written report that was in the materials for this evening's meeting dated as a memorandum from Finance Director John O'Connor dated February 5th, 2020. Indicates that after the prorations that we do in order to factor in for the very large payments that are made on certain items either once a year or semi-annually, after those prorations, the general fund expenditures are at 56.1%. We are 58.3% of the way through the fiscal year, so those are in good shape.
Yep.
Likewise, the expenditures in the parking fund and the prorated expenditures in the utilities fund are respectively at 56.1 and 56.0% for the year. So very solid shape in all fronts. The loan report shows $4,206,141 in outstanding loans. And of the many loans that are being repaid, there is one that has a payment overdue and one other that is in default and is fully reserved. The program income report states $487,765 of available funds for additional grants and loans to be made for housing purposes and economic development purposes in Brattleboro. And the grant activity where we go out and seek grant funds from others to accomplish good purposes here in town. We currently have 41 active grants being implemented and 5 grants in the application process. We have an additional one that's on your agenda this evening. Revenues in general are on target as well in the general fund and the other funds, but we have really good news that we've received now just last Thursday, our second quarterly installment for the local option sales tax, and it came in at $227,215. So added to the first quarter receipt of $211,673, we're currently halfway through the year at $438,888 received. From a source that we had predicted, we knew it was a conservative prediction, but we didn't expect it to be this conservative. We had predicted that halfway through the year we would have $315,000, and that was actually based on data. It wasn't a number out of the air. It was based on prior year's receipts. We think that it is likely that most of the difference between the 315 and the 438 is the result of the state's increased efforts to collect state sales tax and therefore also our 1% local option tax on internet sales.
The online tax, you mean?
I'm sorry?
The online sale tax?
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
that's
internet sales traditionally were not collected or were under collected, and the state of Vermont's tax department has put a lot of effort into correcting that, particularly with some of the larger online retailers. And we think that that's likely accounting for the significant excess revenue that we're able to collect, at least so far, for these first 2 quarters.
Great, thank you, Peter.
Question,
David?
Brandy?
Yes?
Is there, could we ask, I'm not sure who would do it, whether it be the chamber or the downtown, the DBA, or both maybe, to see if they can ascertain some similar data in terms of what the businesses downtown are experiencing in terms of, have they seen any impact? The impact that they were concerned about. Is there any evidence that that's happening? I know people have apologized to me for having to charge 7% sales tax, but and I have to point out to them that it's only 1% more than it was beforehand. But we often do things and then don't look at all of the consequences, and I think it'd be worth our while to try and find out what the impact has been on the businesses. I don't know if we can do that in places like.
I hear what you're saying, right? And like the number is also the story, right? So I'm presuming that yes, we're collecting more from the internet, but maybe also part of that number is,
People are still shopping.
People are still shopping. Mm-hmm. And so like, it's really hard to argue with that number. It's nice and cut and dried. And we could also get some of that qualitative data, but I don't know if I would trust one over the other. I'm probably going to trust the number in the end. Not that it matters what I trust. But
The number
beauty of
is
math.
Yeah.
The number is clear, but the maybe part isn't. And I think the merchants can better reflect on the volume of their sales.
But Chamber
If there's
of
an
Commerce-
additional tax being collected on online sales that's contributing to this, it would cover up if there were fewer sales in town. So really the only source would be the people that are selling. They have books. They know how much they're selling compared to previous years. They could probably give us, it may be too soon, 6 months into it. But
Might be a little soon.
I think it's a little soon.
so we can do it after a year, but we should have a look. It's just responsible to do that.
Further
Yeah, no,
questions
I-
or comments?
Yes. The Chamber of Commerce had that data last year, so I'm sure it would be easy enough for them to add this year to it.
Excellent, thank you for that. Other questions or comments on the January financial report?
I actually do have a
Daniel, what
question
is it?
about this. It's seasonally appropriate. It's about the Public Works Winter Roads budget, which is running higher than expected, and we have a little bit of winter left to go. And I was wondering how we're feeling about that.
Same way we feel every year when this happens.
Nothing like jinxing it, Daniel, but let's answer that.
So we use 5-year rolling averages. Depending on the winter, there's so many different factors. I can't give you a good, clear answer as to what has driven the consumption of additional materials this year. I remember we had quite a lot of ice last year, and my gut read is that we haven't had as much ice. We've had plentiful snow and some ice this year, but maybe my read on that is wrong compared to what's actually been experienced on the streets.
Data versus...
Yeah, exactly. And so be happy to get that from Public Works and provide you an update as to what's been happening out there. I would say it is not unusual. It's basically a 50-50 proposition that some winters are going to be harsher and consume this winter roads budget more substantially than others. Also, as we've pushed information out into the community just within the last week, the part of this that relates to patching potholes is we're going to significantly exceed our expected allocation for that. But there's a fair amount of this that applies to the consumable materials of salt and sand, as well as the materials that are put in to try to stabilize the roads. So it's a more complicated equation than I can tell you about off the top of my head. I'd be happy to have Steve and his team put together a little report.
Sure. And then I had one other thing that I'm going to be quiet. In the same section of the report, Public Works yard expense, building repairs, there was a budget for 15,000 and expenditures have been 28,000. And I was kind of thinking about that within the context of thinking about Public Works building and how things are doing, and I'm presuming that that's in some way to do with that.
Yes. Symptom of a very old facility that we are having to nurse along to keep as functional and safe as we can until we're able to move forward and replace it.
Further questions or comments on the January financial report? There is no action needed, and so we will move into our next item. Thank you for that update, Peter. And our next item is the local hazard mitigation plan progress report. I see that Brian Bannon, our zoning administrator, is here with us. Peter, do you have any lead-ins, or should we go straight to Brian?
Straight to Brian, please.
Hi, Brian.
Brian?
Hey, Brian.
Every year, as part of our participation in the National Flood Insurance Program, we have to report out to the public and the elected officials how we're doing on our hazard mitigation plan. And hazard mitigation plans, we adopt them for 5 years, and we're coming up on readoption in 21. So even as we're evaluating what we've accomplished, we're also starting the process of collecting new projects that will reduce the possibility of disaster coming in the future. So we've actually made really good progress, both as a town and then partners of the town, in reducing risk. And that includes removing almost 80 homes or dwelling units from areas of the highest flood risk. And those are the homes that were most badly damaged during Tropical Storm Irene. So that represents a lot of Brattleboroans, folks who will not be in danger the next time. To further that effort, we've been working with Tri-Park Cooperative Housing on a master planning process to remove an additional 40 homes from the special flood hazard area and find a plan that will allow their homeowners to find a safe place to live. We've also been supportive of Brattleboro Housing Partnership's efforts to relocate the last of the housing out of Melrose Terrace, and they have actually started to do demolition of some of the homes there prior to actually starting a floodplain restoration, which will reduce flood levels in future floods. We're working with the Vermont River Conservancy on a floodplain restoration at 250 Bird Street, and currently we're going for grants to do a brownfield cleanup at the site. We've been working with the Army Corps of Engineers to do a dam inundation study. That's been with the Department of Public Works, and that will also include an emergency response if there is a problem at one of the dams. We're working with them to upgrade our flood mapping along the whetstone, which is from 1974, so considerably out of date, and that will get us a better feeling what the risk actually is. And we've also been working with the Army Corps of Engineers to identify potential sites for future mitigation projects. So it's been a very productive 5 years, and we hope the next plan is equally productive.
This is a pretty detailed list of things that you've been working on with our partners and as the town, and thank you very much. Comments or questions from the board? Liz?
Yeah, hi, Brian. Thank you for all this. This is good stuff. I just had a question. When you're remapping the whetstone, will that take into account Tropical Storm Irene flooding?
Yes, it will. It will be done with new LiDAR data, which is a 1-foot contour data set that was flown by the state. And I believe that was flown in either 15 or 16, so it actually reflects the post-flood conditions. And it also is much more accurate mapping of ground elevations.
Because that was like the 500-year flood or something like that at that point, and it wasn't really reflected in the flood mapping at the time. We've had a couple of hydrology studies done, which are going to go into the new flood mapping. And it indicated that the flood was actually considerably smaller than a 500-year, and in some places it was more a 75-year storm, and in some places it was even less than that. Although when it did get to the downtown area, it did jump into the 500-year floodplain.
Interesting.
Thank you.
The Melrose Street Bridge, the arch bridge there, you have any sense of what this, I don't know what it means that the state scoping process means in terms of time, but that's a real place where water really backs up. It's not an adequate culvert. I mean, do you have any sense of how long the state has to do that? That's not something we can undertake.
I don't think it's been a real high priority by the state because it's been rehabbed.
It's a priority to the people that live next to it.
Exactly.
For sure.
The town has taken every opportunity to encourage the state to put that on its priority list.
It's not a big one.
Well, it's made it onto the list, so that's a start.
That's a good sign.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and the other question is, what does Class 8 certification mean for the flood insurance program?
So it means because we've adopted a more active flood management program than is required, we get a 10% discount on flood insurance policies.
Thank you. Good work.
Quick question. Anybody thinking about flooding during Irene will almost soon get to Flat Street. Do you have any comments on any future plans for mitigation there? I mean, it's just top of my mind just because we have snow block that just went in, and I know the design built in some safeguards, and as well as a CF Church building put the whatever you call those walls down.
Yep.
That you drop down in, I guess, and same with the youth theater. But do you have any comments for anybody who might be watching and thinking, well, what about Flat Street? What's going to happen the next time we get our 500-year flood in 5 years or whenever that is going to be?
Yeah, so for more medium floods, like a 50-year flood, the Bridge Street or First Street restoration should actually give a little bit of protection. It will spread out flood heights so we don't get an immediate surge. It'll also get rid of some debris and some ice flows, so that'll be helpful. It's going to have a more limited effect for really large floods, and as you say, we have been encouraging new development to meet a higher standard, so the snow block has in fact been built to a 500-year flood height standard. We'll certainly encourage other projects to meet that. We did do an EPA Sustainable Cities grant a couple of years back, and they did identify a couple of potential sites for mitigation downtown, and that would be public plazas that allow for more flood storage. So that could be a pathway, it could be a park, but that would mean that we'd have to probably reconfigure some parking or have some private landowners participate to expand the width of the channel.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Well, just building on Tim's comment, that open space that you're working on, that used to be Sir Sossamon property, there's flood storage in that project, correct?
Yes, definitely. It gets pinched off downstream of the site by the Elliott Street Bridge, so that limits how much impact it can have downtown. But it will make a difference in that 25, 50-year flood, and that will be helpful.
A lot of water moving into a small space is basically what's going on, right?
I see at the end that it says public outreach for the 2021 plan update begins in early 2020. Does this count as early 2020?
This is some of our first efforts to get out there, and
Yep.
we're bringing it up in every forum we're going to where it might touch on this.
Perfect. Do you know if the link's already on our website?
Not currently.
Okay, so I'm going to read it off, and then I assume it'll be put up there at some point. So just for people who are listening, it's https // that's how I'm going to say it, tinyurl.com/Brattleboro-2016-HMP, and hopefully that link will be up there. But in the meantime, you can replay my voice over and over until you typed it properly into your URL bar.
Exactly. You don't have to say it twice.
And then it'll just be burned into your brain.
Make it my ringtone.
Make it your ringtone, that's
10
right.
seconds.
Thank you so much, Brian. There's no action required
Brian.
on this item. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, our final item under new business is ratification of the town manager's decision to authorize a grant application. Peter,
Thank you.
sounds bold.
So, as you know, we normally bring grant applications to you and ask that you authorize that we apply. In this case, there was a short time frame, and we would have missed the opportunity to apply for a very small amount of money, but it would be sufficient to allow us to buy a couple of pieces of equipment in support of the swiftwater rescue activities of the fire department. So there's something that I can testify to you is actually called a multi-purpose device.
All right.
So there are two of them that we want to buy that work together with the equipment that the department already has to give them more opportunity to actually connect ropes and have people safely go into swift water situations and conduct rescues of folks that are in danger there. It's only $1,600 worth in order to be able to seize the opportunity to collect these funds and buy this equipment. I needed to authorize that the application be filed prior to bringing it to the board, which is why we've come to you tonight to ask for ratification.
Thank you, Peter. Being able to pull people out of swift water seems important.
Very much
Being
so.
able to safely pull people out of swift water seems important.
Absolutely.
Questions or comments from the board? Okay, then I would entertain a motion for this authorization. Liz?
I move to ratify the town manager's decision to authorize the fire department to apply for a $1,600 Homeland Security grant to fund the purchase of equipment used in swift water rescue operations.
Excellent. Liz has made that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you, Peter. Okay. At this time, we've reached the end of the meeting. There's literally nobody left besides us, administration, Russ, and our interpreters.
And everyone out there. Thank you
And
for
everyone cozy in their homes or wherever they're live streaming this. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourns at 7:35.
watching.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Same time.
I'm so excited I actually get to go.
Channel.
Are you gonna?
Because the
If
kids
I
are
can
gone.
make it.